Today's World Insight with Tian Wei, a new theater of Trump's trade war as the U.S. ends preferential treatment to India and Turkey. And in our series Way in 2 sessions, let's hear about China's transformation through a long-time observer and participant.
The success was built by the Chinese, and we played a little role.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN. We begin today's program with the latest U.S. trade spat. As the U.S. trade deficit continues to rise, the Trump administration has now opened a new front in the trade war, this time targeting India and Turkey. On Monday, Washington announced the plans to remove both countries from a preferential trade program that allows some exports to enter the U.S. duty-free. So what is the impact of this economic decision? Before our discussion, take a look.
Trump moves his trade war to a new frontier. The U.S. Trade Representative's office says it intends to scrap the preferential trade status granted to India and Turkey. They added that India has failed to provide assurances that it will allow equitable and reasonable access to its markets, while Turkey is sufficiently economically developed and no longer qualifies. Removing the two countries from the program will not take effect for at least 60 days after notifying Congress, New Delhi, and Ankara. The removal of the two countries' trade status will be enacted by a presidential proclamation. But India said that the move will have minimal economic impact.
To put things in very exact perspective, that our total GSP benefits were to the tune of $190 million on a trade of $5.6 billion. So the benefits, both in an absolute sense and as a percentage of the trade involved, are very, very minimal and moderate.
Turkish Trade Minister Rasur Pakan on Tuesday criticized Washington's decision. In a tweet, she said, "Unfortunately, this decision conflicts with our mutual objective of reaching a bilateral trade volume of $75 billion that had been announced by both governments. The decision will also negatively affect U.S. SMEs and manufacturers. Many analysts are questioning the timing of this decision."
Türkiye ekonomisi zaten
Turkey hasn't been matching the criteria of the generalized system of preferences, as it is mostly a developed country. So when Trump says, "I'm cutting out Turkey in 60 days, one must ask, why now? Turkey could have been removed 5 or even 10 years ago, and it wouldn't have had an effect on the Turkish economy. So I believe the letter of intent presented to the U.S. Congress is very symbolic in nature.
Regardless if the two countries will counter the U.S. decision, many are concerned that these unilateral trade measures by the U.S. could escalate tensions.
For more on the U.S. trade spat with India and Turkey, joining us in Washington, D.C., we have Bülent Ali Reza, Director for the Turkey Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Also in Washington, Pavel von Schirach, President of the Global Policy Institute. In Taipei, joining us, originally from India, Madhav Nalapat, the UNESCO Peace Chair and Director of the Geopolitics and International Relations Department at the Manipur University. Last but not least, Zhang Jianping, Director General at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. I want to start with you, Mr. Nalapat. Professor, help us to understand only, of course, $190 million US difference. That's not much for India, but many wonder this could be the start of a much bigger trade approach from Washington toward New Delhi. Are you worried?
Look, I'd like to say it's not a question of $200 million. The fact is we have 300 million very poor people in India. And what Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative, is telling the whole world, he doesn't care for these 300 million very poor people. All he cares for are 300 U.S. billionaires and he wants those billionaires to make even more money at the expense of the poor people all over the planet. That is the message that Robert Lighthizer is sending not only to India, but to the entire world. The reality is that India has refused to allow profiteering in essential equipment like stents, which prevent heart attacks, or in knee implants. Now, thousands of people are going to die in India if these stents are priced at a high level. Thousands of people are going to be lame in India every month if these kneecaps are at a high level. So what is Lighthizer saying? He doesn't mind if thousands of people die of heart attack in India. He doesn't mind if thousands of people walk lame in India, so long as some people make some money, some very fat cats who got billions of dollars already. That is his message. The poor, I don't care for the poor. I only care for billionaires.
Okay, all right. Professor Nalapad, we see a very compassionate gentleman over there. Mr. Ali Reza, for Turkey, could that be a different story, or is there a similar concern?
Well, it constitutes, the impact will constitute 10% of Turkey's exports to the U.S. and only 1% of overall Turkish exports. So in that sense, it's not particularly significant. But the timing is significant because, you know, we've had a series of issues on, in the U.S.-Turkish relationship. The U.S. is unhappy about the Turkish purchase of the S-400s. Also, incidentally, with India's decision to purchase the S-400s from Russia. This may affect arms sales to Turkey. And it's curious that, that this was announced, the notification to Congress was announced on the very day that U.S. and Turkey were negotiating on the possible purchase of the Patriots instead of the S-400s, which seems unlikely, and also on northern Syria. So it is going to have an impact much more on the political level than on the economic level.
Mr. von Schirach, though, to you, is it more about trade or is it more about politics?
Well, honestly, I agree with the comments that have already been made. I believe it's more about politics and about you know, creating or strengthening a certain atmosphere. And the general theme here, we're tough. We're tough on trade with anybody, whether it is about you know, the ongoing and hopefully successful, it seems, potentially bilateral negotiations between the United States and China, by far the most important issue on the table right now. But we've got all sorts of other ancillary issues, negotiations with the European Union, negotiations with South Korea, with Japan, the new NAFTA agreement with the United States, Canada, and Mexico on the table. So all these things seem to be separate, but they're part of a general theme. And the general systems of preferences we're discussing today was about providing favorable conditions to emerging countries as long as they would comply with a long list of checks, that they open markets, that they give reasonable access to the United States, etc., etc. The beef with India is that they are not. Now, of course, this is very complicated, and the experts can weigh in on this and on the technical side, but the United States has concluded that India is not complying, is not opening its markets in the appropriate ways, and so of the general system of preferences facilitations for them. As for Turkey, you know, they graduated out of the program. But I fully agree. These are the official, of course, justifications. But it's political. India is having elections very soon.
Yes.
There will be local elections in Turkey in less than a month. We have a complicated relationship with Turkey, as the other guest has correctly pointed out, ranging from Syria to the purchase of you know, of defensive systems and all that. So the timing is suspect.
So, Mr. Zhang, to you in Beijing, is Washington using this as a political weapon?
I think that, of course, there must be some of this type of concerns. Meanwhile, you know, from a trade aspect, I also, you know, pay attention on, you know, relationship between developed economies such as the U.S. and the developing country, India and Turkey. you know that the GSP system, generalized system, of preferences provided, benefit for those developing countries.
Right.
India and Turkey benefit from that, but in the near future they will, get lost on this aspect. In the U.S. side, in the past they provided, this type of preference for developing countries, but in the near future maybe less and less shows their U.S. first. But I deeply worry about this bad signal, because you know that India, their manufacturing sectors are quite limited, developed quite limited. Also, Turkey today is still a developing country. So even if that's a small number, but a small volume, but I think that the U.S. side delivered a bad signal.
That's very true. Professor Nalapad, from the U.S. side, particularly about the reasons why there's such a policy, the Indian Commerce Ministry responded and suggesting it is not true when U.S. accused India of not opening up enough market to the U.S. businesses. To you, does that stand?
No, it doesn't stand at all, because what the U.S. wants essentially is to throw the Indian farmer out of business, throw the Indian small shopkeeper out of business, the way they have been out of business in many parts of the U.S.
Okay, Professor Nalapad, even we're talking about the United States, we need to have a fair debate, so let me ask you, if I could, what about the market access for American businesses and for foreign business into the Indian market? That's the key point here. That's what the key point that the Commerce Ministry in India disputed against the U.S.
Well, India has really opened its market substantially. It's lowered its tariffs substantially. But in some items, India is saying that enough is enough. For example, on e-commerce, the fact is that today, I'm sorry to say, India is almost a digital colony of the United States. We're a digital colony of Facebook, of Twitter, of Amazon, of Google. I mean, Facebook and Google, for example, have 95% of the total digital advertising in India. So when some small baby steps are taken to try and ensure a more level playing field so that we don't become a digital monopoly of U.S. companies headquartered in Silicon Valley, well, then the U.S. says no. The idea of Lighthizer, the idea of fair trade, is 95% for the U.S. and 5% for India. We would say make it 60-40, 40 us and 60 you, but not 95-5.
Right. Dr. Ali Reza, though, the question is, in a trade discussion, even, if we use that very neutral word, it's very important that both sides have some strength so that the discussion will be fair. But if one side is really the weaker party, very clear, then the discussion will never be fair. So in that sense, is Turkey having any muscle to fight back if things going down toward this direction, with this direction, even further?
Well, there wasn't a real imbalance in the trading relationship. The Turkish imports and exports to the U.S. were about the same. What we really should be focusing here is the discrepancy between the stated desire of Trump in his conversation with his counterpart, Turkish counterpart, Erdogan, about the need about the goal of reaching $75 billion in trade, which is almost 4 times what it is now. And his trade negotiator, Lighthizer, basically undermining the U.S.-Turkish trade relationship, albeit not in a particularly significant manner, but very symbolic manner. So, Turkey could retaliate, but my view is that because of all the political issues, Turkey will still concentrate on trying to improve this trade relationship, although Washington does not seem to be forthcoming.
All right. Mr. Bonchirac, in that way, it seems that Washington, particularly the Trump administration, the current White House, is really having its way. around now. Now picking up a fight against China, and further down the road, a little bit something toward India and Turkey just to test, maybe more to come. As you said, there's another long list of trade negotiations, quote unquote, that Washington wants to do with its trading partners around the world. So this is about America first, and probably Mr. Trump will have his way around.
Well, I don't know, what the net effect of all this will be. As we've been discussing, the amounts of trade, the volumes of trade, and the amounts of money involved, in these transactions is relatively modest. But the symbolic significance should not be overlooked. And let's not forget that Mr. Trump is gearing up his re-election campaign. His theme in 2016 was America First. And I'm sure he wants to go back to his base, to his voters, as we're gearing up for the 2020 presidential election. Seems like a long way away, but it's coming up. Saying, hey, look what I've done for you, America. I'm standing by you. I don't want these guys around the world to take advantage of you. And I'm being tough, and I've done this, and I've done that, and this is my record.
Okay.
Whether it's about really big deals, which is China, or small deals, which is, some elements of bilateral exchanges with India, or getting Turkey out of all this. I think it's part of this narrative.
Yeah. It's not just about the narrative for the U.S. inside, yes, for the politics, but for those outside the country, many people are also thinking, what kind of precedents? Since this is already not just 1, 2, or 3, quite a number of them. This is setting for a bilateral trade discussion. From now on, the U.S. has its way, meaning not just what it wants to do, but rather to whoever it wants to do.
Well, look, here's the thing. America started this great vision in the post-war period after 1945, which was based on the Bretton Woods agreements, institutions, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which then graduated into the WTO, saying we are the sponsors or the promoters from Washington of a global system of open trade and a gradual cutting down of tariffs, and everybody is going to do business with everybody else, and gradually this will be a harmonized, if you wish, global trading system.
So now
we are completely in a different place. Now it is everybody's for himself. And we are pursuing our own interest because, and this is the thesis of the Trump administration, we've been taken advantage of.
All right.
We have been opening our markets, and everybody is taking advantage of us. True or not, that's his position.
That is his rhetoric, yes, indeed. Mr. Zhang, of course, the U.S. and the EU, for example, about steel, aluminum, are still battling themselves inside the WTO. Now, whether that will be a result soon, we do not know, but what would that mean, on a global trade basis? The current things going on between Washington and some of the other capitals mean, particularly this time, you have more names being added to the list, particularly from developing and emerging economies like Turkey, like India, even though the amount is small.
Yeah. One thing is that I think recently those different events shows that Trump side before, I love tariff. So nowadays, his saying is in progress of implementation. But I think that those behavior will provide new barriers for WTO reform, and all of those members can make consensus in the future for reform agenda, something like that.
I see. Well, we are running out of our time for this round of discussion, but global trade and the rules of the global trade certainly is the focus of topic for future programs to come. For now, thank you so much, the four of you, for being with us. Dr. Bulent Alireza, Professor Madhav Nalapat, Mr. Paulo von Schirach, and Mr. Zhang Jianping. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, still to come on our program. In our series Weigh-In 2 sessions, let's hear about China's transformation through a long-time observer and participant. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The annual session of the National People's Congress is now taking place in Beijing. What China's stage of development is and how China sees its future are always fascinating topics this time of the year. Today, let's meet Bert Hoffman, who might help us answer some of these questions and more. Imagine what it is like to see history unfolding before your eyes. That is exactly Bert Hoffman during the past few decades in China as the World Bank's country director for China experienced. Well, the world is now scrutinizing the state of China's economy. 25 years ago, when Bert Hoffman landed in this country, it was a very different story. However, things began to change dramatically since China joined the World Trade Organization, and the World Bank worked with China to establish an unprecedented case study of a miraculous transformation. What makes the Chinese miracle, and how can the rest of the world understand this process? What was it like for you? I mean, as a young economist, heard about China a lot, but always a mystery in a way. Is it like, finally I'm here?
Well, for me, I felt like literally like a kid in the candy shop, as they say. You know, I just joined the World Bank. I was what they call the young professional, so indeed a very young and fresh economist. I'm no longer a young professional now. I was in Germany when the wall fell, and so suddenly East Germany and then the rest of Eastern Europe opened up, and I was quite engaged in trying to, well, basically teach Eastern German academics about the market economy. And then I come to the World Bank and I get the opportunity to engage with the biggest transition experiment. In those days you could call it an experiment. It was really...
It is still an experiment, shall we say.
Fair enough, but China now knows a lot more where it's going. In those days, it was before the socialist market economy was declared. That came in '93. China was very small. China was hardly larger. The economy is hardly larger than the economy of my home country, the Netherlands. And it was about 2% of world GDP. So very, very insignificant, but of course very important because of the number of people involved. And so I get told my first assignment is in China, and I got to think about the fiscal system because the government had requested to give input into their discussion on how intergovernmental fiscal system needs to change to make it better suited for what later became the socialist market economy. So for me, this was a dream come true.
And it's much beyond textbooks for a young economist, I would assume.
It was almost like almost like the anti-textbook. You learn a lot about textbooks, and you see I studied quite a bit the OECD systems in fiscal system, but China was so different. China was working on a tax contracting system, which in a way goes back centuries in China, but very unusual for a modernizing country. So helping China shift that system to a more regular tax sharing system as we know now, and those were the '94 reforms, was absolutely fascinating.
After the WTO entry, China certainly, its economy is taking off. You came back to China then, as the chief economist for World Bank here in China. What has changed? What has not?
Well, so what I saw, I mean, I left the program at the end of 1997 and then came back in 2004. In those 7 years, just the physical appearance of China changed dramatically. You know, Beijing had, they had just finished the third ring road when I was about to leave in 1997. I come back in 2004 and there's 6 ring roads. So a dramatic jump in infrastructure, a dramatic change in the physical environment.
The way of thinking, what about that?
Since 2004, you know, a lot has happened in the world economy. Not least, the world economy went through what we call a global financial crisis, but it was largely a Western financial crisis, if you want. And that gave China the confidence to say, well, maybe not everything that is happening in the West is sort of to follow as an example. Maybe we are. 2006 is a watershed document on the medium-term plan on scientific and technological development. China starts thinking about how can we enhance the market on the social side, on the environmental side, and on industrial policy.
And of course the World Bank has a role to play there. because
Right.
of your international
Well-
experience. But that was also the time when people begin to doubt about the roles of IMF, World Bank, as a result of the previous incidents or the kind of crisis in the rest of the world.
We've been engaged with China on China's terms, on China's issues
Yeah.
for almost 40 years now. And one of the things that maybe helped our reputation a little bit was that we, and I'm sure others as well, but we advised China 1 year before the global financial crisis. By 2010, 2011, China starts to think, okay, what next? And then we worked together with the Development Research Center to bring a sort of a very long-term perspective into that discussion. That becomes a report which is called China 2030, and we think that that was very useful.
One of Bert Hoffman's treasured pastimes is his daily stroll in the park near his office, an ancient enclave of temples and gardens, and a touch of real Chinese life makes Bert feel grounded. I also joined him on a walk. He was excited to walk through the neighborhood's stories and history. Besides his favorite haunts, Hoffman has rubbed shoulders with the movers and shakers of China's economic and financial policies. It was through these personal interactions that Bert recognized the real strength and character of China's development. You got to know some of the key persons of reformers,
Right.
also through your early years in China.
Yeah.
Now they are in some of the most important positions of the Chinese economy.
Right.
What was it like then to work with them?
Could
Feel
you-
free to do some name dropping.
So part of the fascination with China is that you could meet highly intelligent people who were obviously very, very smart, very close to decision making, but that thought considerably differently from you. And that interacting with those people is tremendously interesting. The fiscal reforms that I mentioned,
Yeah.
there were two key players. The one was the later finance minister, Lou Jiwei. He was in the Systems Reforms Commission, and he was, I think, director of the Macroeconomic Systems Adjustment, something like that. But
It's
he
amazing you could still remember the title.
well, the Systems Reforms Commission disappeared in the 2000s, but it was very right that he became a minister later on, because he understood very well what was needed, but always liked inputs from the outside on what China can do better. And I think that was the role of the World Bank, to bring in the international experience and to have a third eye, as they say.
What did you suggest to him and
Well-
his colleagues?
Well, we knew that the old tax contracting system wasn't working. So what we discussed was to solve those two problems. One, to get much better incentives
That's right.
for tax payment. Two, to increase the central share, not for the central government to spend, but for the central government to redistribute.
I remember it was quite a big thing, the
Yes.
tax contracting system reform
That's correct. And
during the 90s.
it was a very big political battle, because of course the rich provinces were not that much inclined to give up a lot of the money at the behest
Have
of
you
the
learned
poor.
the logic of China's reform as a result of that process?
Well, a little bit. There was a very good Chinese solution to that, because the big chunk was actually, there was also the introduction of the value-added tax. And I thought that was brilliant. So it was an incremental approach that you could gradually grow into the new system. Now the new system is simply the system. So quite a complex formula, but it solved the political issue
Right.
that rich provinces says, well, we're not going to give up our money. So in the end, the solution was, no, you don't have to give up your money. You just need to give up more of the extra money that comes in.
When that was actually becoming the plan, what was it like for you as an economist, witnessing this process taking place in China?
What the World Bank can do is bring technical solutions. But then the how to get it done,
That's totally...
not for the World Bank to decide. It's so, and that's, if you want, the Chinese characteristics that come in. But it's not just China. It's, in a way, every country. The World Bank, as in the end an outside organization, can't understand the political dynamics that makes it opportune for a certain reform to go in a certain way or not. And sometimes you then have, as a technician, you say, okay, well, that's not an optimal solution. but it's the only solution feasible.
So you see, it is not one size fits all, but rather everybody has to adjust, yet with some of the important ideas that
That's
can be
correct.
shared.
That's correct. And I think it's, again, a lesson that I learned from China, because China used the WTO entry to get domestic reforms done. So my second highlight in my career was actually the socialist market economy. The 93 decisions of the third plenum of the 14th Party Congress.
I'm afraid you got all the numbers right.
back in November 1993, where the decision on the socialist market economy is taken. Before that, you will record there was the famous Deng Xiaoping tour through the South. So I came in January 1992, first time to China. In February, Deng Xiaoping makes his tour through the South.
Tour the South, meaning to Shenzhen and
Shanghai,
Shanghai.
And reigniting the reforms that had gone a little bit sideways a couple of years. And that gave a lot of...
encourage people to be bold.
Absolutely. And so we had this Dalian conference, and again, it was with all the stars of China's reforms. I mean, it was Wu Jingliang, Zhou Xiaochun was there, Lou Jiwei was there, Guo Shuqing was there. So all the people that have really built the socialist market economy since, they were at that conference. And basically to flesh out two things. One, what could immediately be done in terms of stabilizing the economy, but second, then what would it take in systems reform to get a much better macroeconomic balance in the economy. What I appreciated was the earnestness and the depth of the discussion that took place to prepare these really watershed reforms that came later on, because it takes that. And it was the setup was, it was either a Chinese speaker with a Western commentator or a Western speaker with Chinese commentators. And the depth of interaction that took place there was, to me, exemplary.
So it's not superficial discussion, it's not political slogans, it's not reading from the text.
Not made for TV, not made for sound bites, no. This was about in-depth, seeking truth from facts, if you want, really trying to get to the bottom of the matter, and then to see what would be appropriate for China.
I would assume you also learned that phrase in Chinese, seek truth from facts.
Yes.
What is it?
Well, I had the pleasure of good teachers in the World Bank, and the one thing that they taught me was to read speeches. And so I got this very big document, a very big book, which in my first year on working on China, which was the major documents of the People's Republic of China, 1978, 1992.
So what have you read out of those?
Well, all of them, from A to Z. So I have forgotten now most of them, but the Seeking Truth from Facts is definitely the highlight of those speeches. So I was absolutely fascinated by those documents, and ever since then, understanding the true objectives, the true position where China is through indeed statements of leaders and statements of party conferences, is simply it's the basic. You need to understand that. If you don't understand that, you don't know how you can contribute to that. So
you become fascinated of government documents.
Absolutely.
When in Rome, do as the Romans do. When in China, ping pong is the thing to do. And Bert knows his way around a paddle, even though his skills are rusty. One could see he was elevated on the ping pong court and even willing to share some tips. But that is only part of his rich bond with China. Sitting in the office of the World Bank here in Beijing, looking outside the window, China has changed so much.
Indeed. China has changed dramatically since I came first time.
When did you come?
1992, January was my first trip to China. There were only 2 ring roads, so it took about 2.5 hours to get from the airport to the other side of town. In those days, the World Bank office was in the Jiayu Tai, and we always stayed in the Shangri-La Hotel, which was one of the first Western hotels in China. and lots of bikes. And it was dark. I remember it was so dark when I arrived because the power supply wasn't that great at that point. I mean, the economy was developing, but power was in real shortage. Only the power reforms in the 1990s gave an abundance of power. You had all these household little stoves with this compressed coal dust that people were burning in winter. And it gave an absolutely awful air pollution that people seem to have forgotten how bad it actually was. The air pollution now is different.
So blue, gray, dark.
Very gray, lots of bikes.
That's right.
And very difficult transport.
When you arrived, you know, what has changed? What has not to you about China?
In one word, it would be confidence. Confidence knowing where China thinks it's going, and the confidence with which it's pursuing those targets.
If you think about that, this confidence building of China, now you see particularly a China really taking off, second largest economy in the world. There's even some suspicious of whether a new Cold War can happen between China and the United States, the largest two economies in the world. How the Chinese remedy of both how it should improve and how it could work with the others, including the World Bank, also evolving.
China is now the second largest, some say the largest economy in the world, and that's a reality. And it means that other countries would need to find space for China in global institutions such as the World Bank, but also in the WTO and others. It's not just that the organizations are there and China joins. No, it's also perfectly natural that China says, well, here's a few things we want to change. Western countries are quite nervous about that, and that dialogue actually doesn't take place. I tend to think the systems are very close and it just requires a few tweaks, but some people think, oh, this is the end of the liberal world order. I think a good conversation there is important. But international order is not everybody has the same system, right? I mean France is very different from the United States.
Chinese characteristics probably is one of the most frequently used phrase that you have to use as the head of the World Bank here in China, and also when you are explaining to your colleagues back in headquarters. What exactly is it to you?
Well, to me, it's fitting general principles and advice into a domestic situation that outsiders cannot completely understand.
If you think about China, one of the things is what's really driving the change?
I believe that in any country, in the end, it is aspiration of ordinary people that drives change.
From a very young economist to now a middle-aged, high-profile manager in different countries for the World Bank. Well, how much do you think a 25-year-old Bert would be extremely proud if he knows that eventually he becomes who you are today?
Well, I think I've become a lot more patient. I have become much more understanding how difficult reforms are for individuals, for people, for not least because the World Bank itself also went through a number of reforms as I was making my career in the World Bank. How tough things can be, that you cannot prescribe something from the outside. You always need to rely on the judgment of Chinese officials or Indonesian officials. Just knowing what is right doesn't get you there. You also need to understand the circumstances in which this gets translated on results on the ground.
What is one thing? How is even more important. The how.
It's always the how.
You're about to leave China
Yes.
after so many years back and forth. What do you think you can take with you, which you have learned with your China experience?
This doesn't sound modest, but modesty is something that I would take, i.e., I think I played a very small role in an enormous development success, but the success was built by the Chinese, and we played a little role. And that sort of signifies the role of the World Bank and the role of people like me in the World Bank, but that you can actually play a role. That if you are engaged, if you work with competent people on the other side, you can change the course of history, even if it's only in a minor way.
It's such a pleasure, Bert Hoffman, having you on our program. All the best for you.
Thank you very
so
much for having me.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bert Hoffman, director of the World Bank in China, Mongolia, and Korea, recounting his China days at the very end of his term here in this country. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Inside CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Inside team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.